You expect me to stay? Lisa's voice trembled, barely a whisper over the roar of the estate's grand fireplace. To sleep down the hall while she carries your heir? Cassian stood rigid, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched beneath his skin. She's carrying the future of this pack, Lisa. But you are my mate. I was your mate. Lisa looked past him at the blonde woman lingering in the corridor. Alara wore a smug, triumphant smile, resting a manicured hand over her slightly rounded stomach. The ultimate victory. Don't do this, Cassian warned, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his chest. His eyes flashed a terrifying, possessive gold. You cannot run from me. Watch me, she whispered, turning her back on the Alpha King. The heavy oak doors of the master's suite clicked shut, sealing Lisa in a suffocating silence. The air in the room still smelled heavily of Cassian, an intoxicating blend of cedar, rain, and raw power. But underneath it, faint and sickly sweet, was the scent of Alara's perfume. It clung to the edges of the room like a poison. Lisa didn't cry. The time for tears had passed hours ago. In the sterile, brightly lit office of the pack physician when the ultrasound confirmed what Cassian had confessed the night before. A single mistake, he had called it. A moment of weakness during a diplomatic summit while his rut had taken hold. But the child growing inside his former mistress wasn't a mistake. It was a death sentence to the 5 years Lisa had spent building a life, a pack, and a soul-deep bond with the man who was supposed to be her forever. Moving with mechanical precision, she pulled a nondescript leather duffel bag from the back of her walk-in closet. She bypassed the silk dresses Cassian had bought her, the velvet cloaks reserved for pack ceremonies, and the heavy gold jewelry that marked her status as Luna. Instead, she grabbed 3 pairs of faded denim jeans, a handful of plain cotton sweaters, and her most durable boots. Her hands only shook when she reached the vanity. Sitting on the marble countertop was the moonstone ring Cassian had slipped onto her finger under the light of a blood moon. It was an ancient artifact, humming with the ancestral magic of his bloodline. For a fleeting second, her fingers hovered over it. The mate bond, a tangible, living tether wrapped around her heart, pulled painfully in her chest, begging her to put the ring on, to submit, to forgive him. She snapped her hand back, her breath catching in her throat. No, she whispered to the empty room. She grabbed a thick envelope of emergency cash from a hidden compartment behind the mirror. Human currency, untraceable by the pack's vast financial network. And a burner phone she had procured months ago when the first whispers of Alara's return had reached her ears. The estate was quiet. It was past 2 in the morning, and the heavy thunderstorms rolling over the Appalachian Mountains provided the perfect cover. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, drowning out the subtle sounds of her movements. Lisa slung the bag over her shoulder, feeling the heavy, undeniable ache of the bond stretching as she moved toward the servants' staircase. Every step felt like walking through deep water. The pack house was alive with sleeping wolves, and any sudden spike in her heart rate could wake the guards on the lower floor. She forced her breathing to slow, visualizing a calm, frozen lake, a technique an old elder had taught her to mask her emotions. When she reached the ground floor kitchen, she paused. The security perimeter was tightly controlled, especially with the Alpha King in residence. But Lisa wasn't just a rogue sneaking out. She was the Luna. The security protocols were programmed to defer to her. She slipped through the pantry and out the steel service door, stepping directly into the torrential downpour. The freezing rain was a shock to her system, instantly soaking through her thin jacket. But it washed away the cloying sense of the house. At the wrought iron perimeter gate, a lone sentinel stood beneath an umbrella, a glowing cigarette in his mouth. It was Marcus, a young wolf she had personally helped through his first volatile transformation. He stiffened as she approached, dropping the cigarette. "Luna?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. "What are you doing out here? The storm—" "I need you to open the gate, Marcus," Lisa said, keeping her voice incredibly steady. She didn't use the alpha command. She couldn't bring herself to force him. But she let the natural, quiet authority of her station bleed into her tone. Marcus looked at the duffel bag, then at her pale, resolute face. The young wolf's eyes softened with a sudden, tragic understanding. Rumors spread fast in a pack house. He knew. "The alpha—" Marcus started, shifting his weight. He gave orders. "Marcus." Lisa stepped closer, the rain matting her dark hair to her cheeks. "If you ever respected me, if I ever meant anything to you or this pack, open the gate. Please." A heavy silence stretched between them, broken only by the thunder. Marcus swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the wet pavement. He reached out and punched a code into the keypad. The heavy iron gates groaned, sliding open just enough for a person to slip through. "May the goddess protect your path, Lisa," he whispered, dropping her title. "Thank you," she breathed. Lisa slipped through the gap, stepping off pack territory and onto the dark, winding asphalt of the human highway. She didn't look back. The moment her boots hit the public road, a sharp, agonizing tear ripped through her chest, the physical manifestation of distancing herself from her alpha. She gasped, stumbling to her knees as the pain blinded her. But she forced herself back up, putting one foot in front of the other into the blinding storm, letting the darkness swallow her whole. 3 years later, the bell above the door of the Gilded Page. A rare book and antique restoration shop in the heart of rainy Seattle. Chimed softly. Lisa, now known to her employer and the few locals she spoke to as Liana, didn't look up from the workbench. She was meticulously applying a thin layer of binding glue to the spine of a first edition Hemingway. Her fingers steady, her breathing even. The smell of old paper, leather, and strong black coffee was a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the wild, ozone-heavy scents of her former life. "You've been hovering over that spine for 3 hours, Liana," a voice called out. Elias, the shop's elderly owner, shuffled out from the back room carrying a tray of mugs. "If you look any closer, you're going to fall into the text." Lisa offered a small, weary smile, finally setting her tools down and wiping her hands on her canvas apron. "Just making sure the structural integrity holds. It's a delicate piece." "You're a delicate piece," Elias grunted affectionately, setting a mug of steaming tea in front of her. "Drink. You look pale today. The dampness of this city isn't good for your joints." "I'm fine, Elias," she lied smoothly, taking the mug. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been entirely fine for 3 years. The tea wasn't just chamomile and honey, it was heavily laced with dried wolfsbane, a toxic herb for her kind. She brewed it herself in secret. Drinking it was agonizing. It felt like swallowing crushed glass. But it kept her inner wolf sedated and her scent completely masked. To the outside world, she smelled like nothing more than a human woman who spent too much time around old books. It was the only way to hide from him. She took a sip, ignoring the burn as it slid down her throat. The physical pain was a small price to pay for freedom. Seattle was crowded, loud, and polluted, an absolute nightmare for a wolf's senses, which made it the perfect camouflage. No self-respecting pack claimed this dense urban grid. "Did you catch the news this morning?" Elias asked, pulling a feather duster across a row of encyclopedias. That massive corporate merger went through. Obsidian Holdings just bought out the largest real estate developer in the Pacific Northwest. They practically own half the skyline now. Lisa's blood ran cold. The mug in her hand trembled, a single drop of hot tea spilling onto the wooden counter. Obsidian Holdings. It was a human front. A very lucrative, very aggressive human front for Cassian's pack. "Is that so?" Lisa managed to say, her voice impressively flat. "I don't really follow corporate news." "Ruthless, they say." Elias continued, completely oblivious to the sudden terror radiating from his employee. "The CEO, a guy named Cassian Vance. Young, handsome, but apparently terrifying to negotiate with. They call him the Wolf of Wall Street, but literally. The man has no mercy." Lisa closed her eyes, a phantom echo of a low, vibrating growl echoing in her memory. "You cannot run from me." "Well, corporate billionaires rarely have mercy, Elias," she said, forcing herself to turn back to the Hemingway book. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Obsidian Holdings moving into the Pacific Northwest wasn't a coincidence. They had no strategic reason to buy real estate here, unless they weren't looking for property, unless they were looking for a ghost. The bell above the door chimed again. Lisa flinched, her hand instinctively dropping below the counter to the heavy iron letter opener she kept stashed there. A tall man in a dark, tailored suit stepped into the shop. He wasn't Cassian. He was human, mid-40s, with a tired face and a leather briefcase. He looked around the dusty shop with mild distaste before approaching the counter. "Can I help you?" Lisa asked, her voice guarded. "I'm looking for a gift," the man said, not meeting her eyes. "Something unique, silver preferably. Antique mirrors, maybe?" Lisa froze. Werewolves hated silver. It burned their skin. But Cassian knew she loved antique silverwork. She had collected it, handling it with thick gloves, fascinated by the craftsmanship of the very thing that could hurt her. It was an inside joke between them, a symbol of her defiance. "We have a few pieces in the back," Elias chimed in, stepping forward to take over the sale. "Follow me, sir." As the man walked past the counter, a gust of air from the open door caught his coat. Underneath the scent of expensive cologne and city smog, Lisa caught it. The faintest, barely perceptible trace of pine and rain. A pack tracker. Lisa's breath hitched. She backed away from the counter, her eyes wide. They were here. After 3 years of silence, the Alpha King's hounds were sniffing at her doorstep. "Elias," Lisa said, her voice tight, urgent. "I'm sorry, I just remembered. I left my stove on. I need to go." Before the old man could protest, Lisa ripped off her apron, grabbed her coat from the rack, and bolted out the back door into the rainy alley, the mate bond suddenly flaring to life in her chest, burning hotter than it had in 3 years. 3,000 miles away, in a penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Cassian shattered a crystal whiskey glass against the marble wall. The amber liquid dripped down the pristine white surface, a stark contrast to the cold, modern sterility of the room. Cassian stood chest-heaving, his tie undone, the top buttons of his shirt ripped open. His eyes weren't human. They were glowing a feral, furious gold. The beast beneath his skin, clawing to get out. "Say it again," Cassian snarled, his voice dropping into the terrifying dual tone of the Alpha command. Silas, his beta, stood rigidly by the mahogany desk. Silas was a hardened warrior, a man who had faced down rogue packs and silver bullets without flinching. But even he swallowed hard under the crushing weight of Cassian's aura. "The child wasn't yours, Alpha," Silas repeated, his voice remarkably steady despite the danger. We finally broke the physician. Alara bribed him. She had been seeing a rogue from the Northern Territories months before the diplomatic summit. The timing was manipulated. The DNA tests were falsified. Cassian gripped the edge of the heavy desk, the wood groaning and splintering under his immense strength. 3 years. 3 years ago, he had let his true mate walk out into a storm because he believed duty bound him to a child that was never his. He had allowed Alara to take the Luna's suite. He had allowed his pride and his deeply ingrained protective instincts to override the bond. And within 6 months of Lisa leaving, Alara had miscarried, or so she claimed. Cassian realized now it had all been a calculated lie to secure her place at his side. He had banished Alara to the outer fringes of their territory the moment he suspected her deceit. But the damage was already done. Lisa was gone. The only woman whose touch didn't make his skin crawl, the only woman who challenged his wolf instead of cowering before it, had vanished off the face of the earth. Cassian closed his eyes, a ragged, broken breath escaping his lips. And the tracker in Seattle? Silas picked up a sleek black tablet from the desk and handed it to him. Vaughn checked in 5 minutes ago. He tracked a cluster of human currency transactions matching the serial numbers from your private estate vault. He narrowed it down to a neighborhood in Seattle. He walked into an antique shop. Cassian stared at the screen. It was a still image from Vaughn's hidden body camera. The angle was slightly obscured, but the subject was unmistakable. She was older, thinner. Her dark hair was cut shorter, grazing her shoulders, and she wore a bulky, unflattering sweater. But it was her. Even through the grainy digital image, Cassian's wolf howled, throwing itself against the bars of his ribcage, desperate, starving, violently possessive. Mate. Vaughn said she bolted before he could engage. Silas continued, watching his alpha carefully. She recognized his scent, even under the human cover. She's smart, Cassian. She's been masking her own scent with wolfsbane. It's why we couldn't track her on the grid. Wolfsbane, Cassian whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. The thought of her voluntarily ingesting poison just to stay hidden from him sent a fresh wave of self-loathing and fury crashing over him. She is hurting herself to hide from me. She thinks you have an heir with Alara, Silas reminded him gently. She thinks she was replaced. Cassian dropped the tablet onto the desk. The beast receded slightly, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly focused predator. The hunt was no longer a desperate search in the dark. He had a location. He had a visual. Recall Vaughn, Cassian ordered, his voice suddenly dead calm. It was a tone that made Silas's blood run cold. It was the tone Cassian used right before he dismantled an enemy pack. Tell him to secure the perimeter of that neighborhood, but do not engage. If he spooks her again, she'll run somewhere we can't find her. And you? Silas asked. Cassian turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sprawling, glittering city below. The rain was starting to fall in New York, pattering against the glass. He remembered the rain the night she left. He remembered the exact way her voice broke when she told him to watch her go. Fuel the jet, Cassian said, his reflection in the glass showing eyes that still burned with gold fire. I'm going to Seattle. I'm bringing my wife home, and heaven help anyone who stands in my way. Thuffer. Lisa's apartment was a cramped, fourth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions. It was a far cry from the sprawling, sunlit suites of the Alpha King's estate. But it was safe. Or at least it had been. She burst through the door, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The mate bond was a living, thrashing thing inside her chest, pulling her toward the east, toward the approaching storm that was her husband. She slammed the deadbolt, threw the chain, and instantly dropped to her knees, clutching her ribs. The wolfsbane tea she had consumed earlier was warring with the sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. Her vision blurred at the edges, a harsh ringing filling her ears. She forced herself upward, staggering toward the tiny bedroom. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head. A go-bag sat under her bed, packed with a new set of forged IDs, cash, and a map of crossing points into Canada that bypassed pack-controlled borders. She shoved a handful of clothes into the bag, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her toothbrush. "Focus," she hissed to herself, staring at her pale reflection in the cracked vanity mirror. "You survived leaving him once. You can do it again." Down below, on the rain-slicked street, a sleek, black SUV pulled to a silent stop. Cassian stepped out, ignoring the torrential downpour that instantly soaked his tailored suit. He didn't need an umbrella. He tilted his head back, closing his eyes as his senses expanded, cutting through the smog, the exhaust, and the damp pavement. He ignored the throngs of humans hurrying past him under umbrellas. He was searching for a very specific frequency. And then he caught it. It was buried beneath layers of harsh, bitter wolfsbane and cheap lavender soap, but it was unmistakable. The scent of rain-washed wild roses. Lisa. A low growl rumbled in his throat, vibrating the windows of the parked cars nearby. His beta, Silas, stepped out of the SUV behind him, flanked by 2 imposing enforcers in plain clothes. "She's in the building, Alpha," Silas said quietly, his hand resting casually inside his jacket where his sidearm was holstered. "4th floor, corner unit. Vaughn has the fire escape covered." "Tell him to stand down," Cassian commanded, his golden eyes snapping open, fixed intensely on the 4th floor window. "No one touches her. No one speaks to her. She's mine to retrieve." Cassian crossed the street with predatory grace. The front door of the apartment complex was locked, but the heavy magnetic seal surrendered instantly as Cassian gripped the handle and ripped it open with a sickening crunch of metal. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots making no sound on the worn carpet. Inside her apartment, Lisa zipped her bag closed. She turned toward the door, and then she felt it. The air pressure in the room shifted. The temperature plummeted. The heavy, suffocating aura of an alpha king washed over the space, pressing against her skin, demanding submission. He was on the other side of the door. "Lisa." Cassian's voice vibrated through the cheap wood. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, rumbling command that bypassed her ears and struck directly at her soul. "Open the door." Her heart stopped. She backed away, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Hearing his voice after 3 years, rougher, darker, laced with an agonizing mixture of fury and desperation, shattered the fragile walls she had built around her heart. "I know you're in there," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I can hear your heart beating. I can smell the poison you've been swallowing to hide from me. Open the door, Lisa, or I will take it off its hinges." She grabbed her bag and bolted for the kitchen window. The fire escape. Behind her, the front door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. Cassian stepped into the tiny, drab apartment. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the empty wolfsbane mugs, the meager furnishings, the absolute lack of comfort. A fresh wave of guilt and rage washed over him. He had driven his Luna to this. He lunged toward the kitchen just as Lisa swung her legs over the windowsill. "Lisa, stop!" he roared. She paused on the rusted iron grate, the freezing rain immediately soaking her through. She looked back over her shoulder. Time seemed to freeze. Cassian stood in her kitchen, completely filling the space. He looked older. There were harsh lines around his mouth, and his dark hair was wet and unruly. But his eyes, those striking, terrifying golden eyes, were locked onto hers with a hunger so profound it made her knees weak. For a fraction of a second, the bond flared so brightly between them that it was almost blinding. Her wolf clawed at her mind, screaming to submit, to throw herself into his arms and never let go. Then she remembered Alara's smiling face, the ultrasound, the betrayal. Lisa broke eye contact, turned, and scrambled down the wet iron stairs into the dark alley below. The streets of Seattle were a labyrinth of narrow alleys, towering brick walls, and blinding neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement. Lisa ran blindly, her boots splashing through deep puddles, her lungs burning. The wolfsbane in her system made her sluggish. A normal werewolf could have cleared 6 city blocks in seconds, but she was trapped in a body functioning at a fraction of its capacity. She turned down a narrow corridor behind a row of closed seafood restaurants, slipping on discarded ice and fish scales. She needed to reach the subway. If she could get underground, mix her scent with thousands of commuting humans, she might have a chance. A shadow detached itself from the wall ahead of her. Lisa skidded to a halt, gasping for air. Cassian stood at the end of the alley, blocking her only exit to the main street. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The rain seemed to curve around him, avoiding him out of pure intimidation. "Where are you going, Lisa?" he asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Canada. You think a human border will stop me?" "Stay away from me," she choked out, backing up until her shoulders hit the cold, wet brick of a dumpster. She reached into her coat pocket, her fingers wrapping tightly around a small canister of silver nitrate pepper spray. It was a vicious, highly illegal deterrent in the pack world. "Put that away," Cassian said, his eyes flicking to her pocket. "You know it won't stop me. It will only make me angry." "You're already angry," she shot back, her voice trembling but defiant. "You have no right to be here, Cassian. You made your choice 3 years ago." Cassian stopped 10 feet from her. The raw agony in her voice felt like a physical blow. He looked at her closely, really looked at her, and his heart cracked. She was painfully thin. The vibrant, glowing Luna he had known was gone, replaced by a ghost shivering in the rain. "There was no child, Lisa," he said, his voice cracking. Lisa froze, her hand still inside her pocket. "What?" "Alara lied." Cassian took another step, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "The physician falsified the records. She miscarried a rogue's child months after you left. It was never mine. I swear to you on my life, on my wolf, I never touched her after we mated." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the alley, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Lisa stared at him, her mind desperately trying to process the words. It was a lie. The foundation of her trauma, the reason she had given up her life, her pack, her soulmate, was a fabrication. But instead of relief, a hot, blinding wave of anger washed over her. "And you believed her?" Lisa whispered, tears finally mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "You didn't trust me. You didn't trust the bond. You looked at the woman who had been trying to usurp me for years, and you took her word over my life." Cassian flinched, the accusation striking true. "I was an arrogant fool. I thought I was protecting the pack's legacy. I have spent every day of the last 3 years paying for that mistake, Lisa. I have torn the continent apart looking for you." "Well," You found me, she said bitterly. And my answer is the same. I am not coming back to be your Luna. I am not a prize to be reclaimed just because you realized you made a mistake. You are my mate, Cassian roared, his control slipping. His wolf surged forward, a terrifying display of dominant power that forced Lisa to her knees. He was across the distance in a fraction of a second, his hands gripping her shoulders, hauling her up against his chest. The contact was electric. A shockwave tore through both of them as the severed bond viciously stitched itself back together. Lisa gasped, a raw animal sound escaping her throat as Cassian buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent deeply, desperately. Mine, he growled against her skin, his hands moving to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You are mine. You will always be mine. For a terrifying, beautiful moment, Lisa almost surrendered. The warmth of his body, the absolute safety of his embrace, it was intoxicating. But the memory of the cold, lonely nights in Seattle anchored her. No, she whispered. Before he could react, she pulled the canister from her pocket and sprayed it directly into his face. Cassian bellowed in pain, stumbling backward, his hands flying to his eyes as the silver nitrate burned his skin. The grip on her shattered. Lisa didn't wait. She turned and sprinted down the alley, disappearing into the chaotic crowds of the Seattle night, leaving the Alpha King on his knees in the rain. By midnight, Seattle felt less like a city and more like a carefully constructed prison. Lisa sat huddled in the back booth of a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. Her hands were still shaking. The image of Cassian falling to his knees, blinded by her own hand, was seared into her retinas. A part of her wolf was screaming in agony for hurting their mate. But her human mind knew it was the only way she could have escaped his overwhelming gravitational pull. She had tried the bus terminal. A dozen men in sharp black suits with earpieces had been stationed at every ticketing counter, their eyes scanning the crowds with unnatural intensity. The train station was worse. They had hounds, actual tracking wolves in human form, patrolling the platforms. Obsidian Holdings didn't just buy real estate. They bought infrastructure. Cassian had effectively locked down an entire metropolitan area in less than 3 hours. She pulled her burner phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked, but it still functioned. As she stared at it, the device buzzed violently in her hand. An unlisted number, a text message. I am not angry that you hurt me. I am angry that I made you feel like you had to. Lisa stared at the glowing screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't reply. 10 seconds later, another message appeared. I have grounded every flight out of SeaTac. I have stopped the trains. The highways are monitored by my enforcers. I will not hunt you through the streets like prey anymore, Lisa. But I am not leaving this city without you. A final message popped up, chilling her to the bone. Midnight. The Obsidian Tower penthouse. Come to me, or I will turn this city upside down piece by piece until you have nowhere left to hide. The collateral damage is up to you. She slowly lowered the phone. He was using the one thing he knew she couldn't ignore. Her compassion. If she stayed hidden, he would disrupt the lives of thousands of humans. He would deploy his wolves into the streets. The delicate veil between the human world and their kind would fracture, and innocent people would get caught in the crossfire of an alpha's wrath. He had boxed her in completely, not with physical force, but with an impossible moral choice. Lisa looked out the diner window at the gleaming skyline. In the distance, cutting through the low-hanging clouds, was the newly erected Obsidian Tower. It was a massive obelisk of black glass and steel, a monument to Cassian's wealth and unyielding dominance. He was up there, waiting for her. "Refill, hun?" the tired waitress asked, holding up a coffee pot. "No, thank you," Lisa said quietly, sliding a $20 bill onto the table. "I have somewhere to be." She stood up, pulling her damp coat tightly around her shoulders. She reached into her boot, her fingers brushing the cool, reassuring hilt of a silver-inlaid dagger she had kept hidden for 3 years. She hadn't used the pepper spray to permanently harm him, only to stun him. But if she walked into his fortress, into the lion's den, she needed to know she had a way to defend herself if his golden eyes turned entirely feral. She walked out of the diner and hailed a passing cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Lisa looked at the towering black spire in the distance, a fortress built by the man who had shattered her heart and was now tearing the world apart to glue it back together. "The Obsidian Tower," she said, her voice finally steady. The running was over. It was time to stand her ground. The lobby of the Obsidian Tower was a cavern of polished black marble and brushed steel, silent and imposing. Despite the late hour, the perimeter was heavily guarded. Men in sharp suits stood at precise intervals, their posture rigid, their eyes tracking her every movement. Lisa knew what they were. Elite pack enforcers, the deadliest wolves in Cassian's inner circle. As she pushed through the revolving glass doors, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The subtle, masking scent of her wolfsbane was failing, overpowered by the sheer adrenaline pumping through her veins. The enforcers recognized her, not just as a runaway, but as their Luna. One by one, the massive, terrifying men dropped their gazes to the floor, exposing their throats in a silent, synchronized display of absolute submission. Lisa ignored them, her boots clicking sharply against the marble as she walked straight to the private executive elevator. Silas, the beta, was waiting by the steel doors. His face was bruised, likely a consequence of Cassian's earlier rampage. But his expression softened as she approached. He cleared the building of all human personnel, Silas said quietly, pressing his thumb to the biometric scanner to call the car. "It's just him up there. Lisa, please. He is barely holding on to his humanity right now." "He backed me into a corner, Silas," Lisa replied, her voice cold, though her hands trembled inside her coat pockets. Animals bite when they are cornered. He should know that better than anyone. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Silas didn't follow her in. He simply offered a solemn nod as the steel doors closed, sealing her inside the rising cage. The ascent was fast, your stomach dropping as the numbers on the digital display blurred past 50, then 60, then 70. With every floor, the invisible weight of the mate bond grew heavier, vibrating in the narrow space until it felt like the air itself was humming. When the doors finally parted at the penthouse level, the silence was deafening. The entire floor was a sprawling, open-concept masterpiece of modern architecture, encased in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, rain-swept view of the Seattle skyline. The lights were dimmed, casting long, sharp shadows across the minimalist furniture. Cassian stood at the far end of the room, looking out at the city. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, intricate pack tattoos wrapping around his forearms. The skin around his eyes was angry and red from the silver nitrate. But his vision had clearly returned. He didn't turn around when she stepped into the room. He didn't have to. The bond flared so brightly between them, that Lisa felt a physical ache in her chest, a phantom tug pulling her directly toward his spine. "I bought this building 6 months ago." Cassian's voice was a low, rough rasp, devoid of the alpha command. It was just a man, stripped bare. Vaughn caught a whisper of a rumor about a woman buying rare silver artifacts in the Pacific Northwest. It was a ghost of a lead. "But I poured millions into this city, bought up every surveillance grid, every property, just to have the infrastructure ready if it was you. You trapped a city of millions just to trap me," Lisa said, stopping 20 feet behind him. She reached into her boot, her fingers wrapping around the hilt of the silver-inlaid dagger. She pulled it free, holding it at her side. "You haven't changed, Cassian. You still think you can conquer everything that defies you." Cassian finally turned around. His golden eyes locked onto the weapon in her hand, but he didn't flinch. He didn't bare his teeth. Instead, a look of profound, devastating sorrow washed over his sharp features. He closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. Lisa raised the dagger, the silver catching the dim light of the penthouse. She pointed the tip directly at his chest, right over his heart. "Stop," she warned, her voice trembling. Cassian didn't stop. He walked right up to the blade until the sharp silver tip pierced the fabric of his shirt, pressing directly against the warm skin over his frantically beating heart. A faint hiss echoed in the quiet room as the silver burned him, but he didn't even blink. "If this is what it takes to earn your peace, Lisa," Cassian whispered, his voice cracking with raw emotion. He reached up, gently wrapping his large hand around her trembling fingers, pressing the dagger harder against his own chest. "If my death is the only way to balance the scales for what I took from you, then push. I will not stop you. I am yours to destroy." Lisa stared into his eyes, searching for the arrogant alpha king who had ordered her to stay in a house with his mistress. But he wasn't there. All she saw was a broken mate, bleeding on her blade, offering her his life as an apology. The silver hissed against Cassian's skin, the faint scent of singed flesh filling the air between them. Lisa's hand shook violently. She stared at the man she had loved for years, the man who had shattered her world, now offering his life with a terrifying, absolute sincerity. "Do you think this fixes it?" Lisa's voice broke, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her pale cheeks. "Do you think bleeding for me erases the ultrasound? The look on Alara's face? The sheer humiliation of being told I wasn't enough to secure your legacy?" "No," Cassian breathed, his thumb gently stroking the back of her trembling hand, completely ignoring the silver burning a hole into his chest. "Nothing erases it. But you need to know what happened after you left. You need to know the truth of the pack you built." Lisa didn't lower the knife, but her grip faltered. "The night you walked out that gate," Cassian continued, his golden eyes locked onto her brown ones, swimming in his own unshed tears. "Half my soul tore away. I thought I was doing my duty. But without you, the pack started to rot. I started to rot." He stepped a fraction of an inch closer, the blade biting deeper. 6 months later, Alara faked a miscarriage. But her lies began to unravel. Her scent changed. Silas investigated the physician. "We found the offshore accounts, the forged DNA records, the rogue she had paid to sleep with her before the summit. It was a coup, Lisa, orchestrated by Alara and 3 of the conservative elders who thought a human-born Luna made us look weak." Lisa's breath hitched. "The elders knew. They funded it," Cassian snarled, a flash of his alpha dominance bleeding through his sorrow. "They wanted a pure-blood heir, They wanted you gone. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. I showed them what an alpha without a Luna truly looks like. Cassian finally released her hand, stepping back so the dagger slipped from his chest. A small, burned puncture wound marred his skin, but it was already beginning to heal. I stripped Ilara of her wolf, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a deadly, hollow whisper. I used the ancestral rites to sever her from the moon. She lives as a human now, banished to the frozen tundras of the deep north. The elders who conspired with her were stripped of their ranks and exiled. I gutted the hierarchy of our pack, Lisa. I burned the old laws to the ground to ensure no one would ever question your place again. Lisa lowered the dagger, her arm suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The magnitude of what he was saying crashed over her. He hadn't just looked for her. He had dismantled the very foundation of his kingdom to avenge her. You destroyed the council? She whispered, shocked. I destroyed anything that stood between us, Cassian replied, stepping closer again, his hands hovering just inches from her arms, terrified to touch her without permission. But it meant nothing. My crown, my territory, my vengeance. It is all ashes without you, Lisa. I am laying it all at your feet. I am not asking you to submit to me. I am asking you to let me submit to you. The adrenaline that had been keeping Lisa on her feet suddenly evaporated. The emotional whiplash, combined with the toxic levels of wolfsbane in her system, caught up with her all at once. The world tilted violently. The dagger slipped from her numb fingers, clattering loudly against the marble floor. Her knees buckled. Cassian caught her before she hit the ground, his massive arms wrapping around her with lightning speed. The moment his skin fully pressed against hers, the mate bond exploded into a blinding crescendo. But Lisa couldn't feel the warmth of it. A terrible, agonizing cold was spreading from her chest outward. The wolfsbane, suppressed for hours by terror and adrenaline, was now attacking her nervous system with a vengeance. She gasped for air, her lips turning a faint shade of blue, her body convulsing in his arms. Lisa! Cassian roared, the sheer panic in his voice vibrating the glass walls of the penthouse. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the massive leather sofa in the center of the room. Silas, get the medical team up here now. He bellowed toward the ceiling, knowing his beta was listening through the security feeds. No. Lisa choked out, her fingers weakly gripping his ruined shirt. Her inner wolf was fighting a losing battle against the poison. No, doctors. They can't fix this. You've poisoned yourself for years to hide from me. Cassian choked back a sob, dropping to his knees beside the sofa, pressing his forehead against hers. He could feel her life force flickering, dimming under the crushing weight of the toxic herbs. I did this to you. I did this. Cassian, she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. The bond. Cassian understood instantly. Werewolf healing was accelerated by the presence of a mate. By keeping herself severed from him, her body had no defense against the wolfsbane. He didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the sofa, pulling her trembling, freezing body entirely against his broad chest, wrapping her in his heat, his scent, and his overwhelming power. He pushed his own life force through the invisible tether connecting their souls, demanding her body to fight, demanding her wolf to wake up. I've got you. He whispered fiercely into her hair as the storm raged against the glass outside. I'm not letting you go. Not in this life, not in the next. When Lisa finally opened her eyes, the world was bathed in a soft, pale gold. The torrential rainstorm that had battered Seattle through the night had broken, leaving behind a crisp, cloudless morning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, warming the leather sofa where she lay. She wasn't cold anymore. The agonizing, brittle ache in her joints, a constant companion for 3 years, was completely gone. She took a deep breath, expecting the familiar burn of wolfsbane in her lungs. But there was only the clean, intoxicating scent of pine, rain, and Cassian. She turned her head. Cassian was sitting on the floor beside the sofa, his head resting against the cushions near her hip. He was fast asleep, his features finely relaxed, though his hand maintained a vice-like grip on hers, as if he feared she would vanish into thin air the moment he let go. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of years of sleepless nights. Lisa watched the steady rise and fall of his chest. The anger that had sustained her for so long was gone, burned away by the silver she had held to his chest and washed away by the tears she had shed in his arms. What remained was the undeniable truth of their existence. They were two halves of a fractured whole, and he had bled to put them back together. She gently squeezed his fingers. Cassian was awake instantly. His golden eyes snapped open, wide and frantic, scanning her face for any sign of pain. He shot up, hovering over her, his hands gently framing her face. "How do you feel?" His voice was rough with sleep and lingering terror. "Does anything hurt? I can call the healers." "I'm okay," Lisa interrupted softly, bringing her hands up to cover his. "Cassian, I'm okay. The poison is gone." He let out a ragged breath, dropping his forehead down to rest against hers. He stayed like that for a long time, just breathing her in, reacquainting his wolf with the scent of his Luna. "I'm so sorry," he whispered against her skin, the words heavy with a 3-year burden. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Lisa gently pushed him back so she could look him in the eyes. "If I come back," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded an entire pack, "things will be different. I will not just be your mate, Cassian. I will not sit quietly while council elders plot behind closed doors. I will rule beside you, as an equal." "The council is gone," Cassian reminded her, a faint, proud smile touching the corners of his mouth. "There is only you and me. You will have half my power, half my territory, and all of my soul. Whatever you command, the pack will obey. Whatever you ask of me, I will do." He reached into his pocket. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a small velvet pouch. He opened it, tipping the contents into his palm. It was the moonstone ring, the ancient artifact of his bloodline that she had left sitting on her vanity 3 years ago. The stone seemed to catch the morning sunlight, glowing with a soft, ethereal blue fire. "I have carried this in my pocket every day since you left," Cassian said softly. He didn't ask the question. He simply held it out to her, an offering of his kingdom and his heart. Lisa looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. The Alpha who had torn apart his own hierarchy, bought a human city, and offered his heart to a silver blade just to prove his devotion. She didn't hesitate this time. She reached out, extending her left hand. Cassian's eyes filled with a blinding, reverent relief as he slid the heavy silver band onto her ring finger. The moment the cool metal touched her skin, the mate bond clicked perfectly, flawlessly into place. It was no longer a frantic, pulling tether, but a solid, unbreakable bridge of warmth and light connecting their minds. Her wolf howled in her mind, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Cassian closed his eyes, his own beast echoing the sentiment, a deep, rumbling purr vibrating in his chest. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted like tears, forgiveness, and the promise of a new dawn. It was gentle at first, a hesitant exploration. But as Lisa tangled her fingers in his dark hair and pulled him closer, it deepened into a desperate, all-consuming claiming of what was always theirs. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing heavily, Cassian rested his forehead against hers, a genuine, breathtaking smile illuminating his face. "Let's go home, my queen," he whispered. Lisa looked past his shoulder at the sprawling city of Seattle below, the cage of glass and steel that had almost been her final hiding place. She squeezed his hand, the moonstone cool and heavy against her skin. "Yes," Lisa smiled, the first true smile she had worn in years. "Let's go home." If you were captivated by Lisa and Cassian's intense, high-stakes romance, please hit the like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy romance readers, and subscribe for more dramatic, cinematic tales of alphas, true mates, and epic redemption arcs.